Good morning and welcome to your math lesson, lesson 15.5, compare and order mixed numbers. So yesterday you learned all about mixed numbers, and the day before you learned about comparing different fractions. So today we're going to put them together and compare mixed numbers to decide which one's the least, which one's the greatest, and to order them in the correct order. So what we're going to start off with is 1 5/6, 1 2/3, and 1 1/2. We're going to compare them to see what order they go in. So I drew some models. Each one has 2 holes in it, but the top one I split into sixths, the middle one I split into thirds, and the bottom one I split into halves. And I'm going to color them in to represent each number. So the top one will represent 1 5/6, the middle one 1 2/3, and the bottom one 1 1/2. So I'll color those in to represent that. So I roughly colored each one in. See how the top one is 1, and then 1 5/6. The middle one is 1 2/3, and the bottom one is 1 1/2. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that the top one has the most colored in, so it's the greatest number. The middle one has less than that, but more than that, so it's the middle number. And this one has the least colored in, so it's the least. So if we put them in order from greatest to least, they're already in order. 1 5/6 is greater than 1 2/3, which is greater than 1 1/2. Now, that first example was pretty easy because we didn't have to compare the whole numbers because they were all the same. We just had to compare the fractions. But what about when the whole numbers are different from each other? Let's try it out. So now we're going to compare 1 1/2, 2 1/6, and 1 1/3. Draw out your picture. So I drew 3 holes for each one, and then I split the top one into halves, the middle one into sixths, and the bottom one into thirds. So I'm going to color them in to represent our models, or to be models for our numbers. So I colored the top one to be 1 1/2, the middle one to be 2 1/6, and the bottom one to be 1 1/3. And if we look at it, we'll see that this is the least, this is the greatest, and that goes in the middle. Does that make sense? So one method is to draw it out like we just did. Another method is to use number lines. So right now I'm comparing 2 2/3 and 2 1/4. And I drew out 2 different number lines. The top one is split into thirds. The bottom line is split into fourths. So I'm going to mark 2 2/3 on the top line, 2 2/3, and I'm going to mark 2 1/4 on the bottom line. And as you can see, 2 2/3 is greater than 2 1/4. So that would be my inequality. Remember, the alligator always eats the bigger number. The last method you can use is fraction bars. So if I'm comparing 1 2/3 and 1 1/3, here's my 1, and then beyond that, here's 1 2/3 versus 1 1/3. And as you can see, kind of, the 2/3 is greater than 1/3. That is comparing mixed numbers. I hope that makes sense. And as always, feel free to ask me questions if you have them. Otherwise, work on PW90